Tonight, you will stand in front of a bathroom mirror and check your smile before you leave the house. You will notice a tooth that sits a little crooked. Maybe your dentist has already told you there isn't room for your wisdom teeth. Maybe you remember the drill, the numbness, the small dread that comes with a routine cleaning. You might even remember the specific sound of that drill against enamel, or the metallic taste that follows a cleaning that went a little too deep. You assume this is just what human mouths are like. You assume every person who ever lived dealt with the same crowded, cavity-prone, high-maintenance teeth you did. But the real answer is far stranger. 10,000 years ago, a person could open their mouth and reveal something close to a perfect set of teeth. Straight, evenly spaced, free of decay, no braces, no fillings, no extractions. And they never once touched a toothbrush. Something happened between then and now. Something changed the shape of your jaw, the chemistry of your mouth, and the odds that a dentist would ever need to see you at all. And the story of what changed says less about ancient people than it does about you. Here is a number worth pausing on. According to the World Health Organization, untreated tooth decay is now the single most common health condition tracked anywhere on the planet, ahead of every other disease or injury researchers measure. Oral disease as a whole touches close to half of everyone alive today. That is not a niche problem. That is one of the most universal human experiences there is, and it has not always been this way. Start with the mouth itself. Your mouth is not empty space. It is an ecosystem. Hundreds of species of bacteria live there right now, coating your teeth, your gums, your tongue. Most of them are harmless. Some of them help you. A few of them, given the right fuel, will quietly eat away at your enamel until a hole opens up. That hole is what a dentist calls a cavity. Picture that ecosystem up close. Every tooth you own is coated in a thin, sticky film called plaque. And that film is packed with bacteria simply going about their day. They are not attacking you. They are living the way any colony of organisms lives, feeding on whatever drifts past. The trouble starts only when what drifts past is something they can turn into acid. Where does that fuel come from? Sugar, starch, anything that breaks down into simple carbohydrates the moment it hits your saliva. The bacteria feast on it, and as they digest it, they release acid. That acid dissolves the hardest substance in your body, one invisible layer at a time. Animal is harder than bone. It is the single hardest tissue you will ever produce, and it still has no real defense against a mouth flooded with sugar day after day. So here's the question worth sitting with. If cavities are caused by sugar and starch, and if your ancient ancestors ate almost none of either, what would their mouths have looked like? Alan Cooper wanted to find out. He directs the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA, and his team did something that sounds almost impossible. They extracted DNA from the calcified plaque still stuck to the teeth of skeletons thousands of years old. That hardened plaque works like a tiny time capsule, preserving a snapshot of exactly which bacteria were living in a person's mouth at the moment they died. It functions almost the way amber preserves an ancient insect, except instead of a single trapped creature, it locks in an entire invisible community. What Cooper's team found reshaped how scientists think about the human smile. The ancient hunter-gatherer mouth carried a wide, balanced mix of bacterial species. Harmful, decay-causing strains were present, but kept in check by sheer microbial diversity. Once populations began farming, that balance collapsed. A narrow group of aggressive cavity-causing bacteria took over, and it happened fast. Within a relatively short span of human history, gum disease and tooth decay went from rare to common. Gum disease, what a dentist calls periodontitis, is a separate but related problem, an infection and inflammation along the gum line, severe enough to loosen a tooth in its socket and, eventually, cause it to fall out entirely. You do not need to imagine why. Farming brought grain. Grain is starch. Starch breaks down into sugar the moment it meets your saliva. For the first time, human mouths were bathed in a steady, daily supply of fermentable carbohydrate, and the bacteria that thrive on it multiplied out of control. Picture it happening in real time, generation after generation. A hunter-gatherer child grows up chewing wild greens, tough meat, roots, nuts. A farming child, born only a few hundred years later in the same valley, grows up chewing porridge, bread, cooked grain, softened and starchy from the very first bite. Two children, two very different futures for their teeth. This was not a single dramatic decision. No one woke up one morning and chose bread over roots. Agriculture spread slowly, valley by valley. over thousands of years as small bands of people leaned harder and harder on the crops they had learned to grow. But once a population committed to that grain, generation after generation inherited the same starchy staple, and the mouths of an entire people began changing together. And this happened again and again, in places that had no contact with one another. Wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent, rice in the river valleys of China, maize in Mesoamerica. Different crops, different continents, different centuries, yet almost the same dental story followed each one, like a bill that always eventually came due. It is tempting to end the story there. Agriculture ruined ancient teeth, and the hunter-gatherer mouth was untouched paradise. It is a clean story. It is also incomplete. In a cave called Tafaralt, tucked into the hills of northeastern Morocco, archaeologists uncovered a hunter-gatherer cemetery containing burials between roughly 15,000 and 13,000 years old. That is, thousands of years before farming reached the region. If the clean story were true, these teeth should have been flawless. They were not. Nick Barton of the University of Oxford helped lead the excavation, working alongside researchers Isabel de Groot and Louise Humphrey of the Natural History Museum in London. When the team examined 52 sets of adult teeth from the cave, they found decay in more than half of them. Only 3 skeletons showed no cavities at all. Some of these ancient people had clearly lived with the same aching, throbbing tooth pain you associate with a dental emergency today. What were they eating that could do this without a single grain of farmed wheat? Acorns, pine nuts, wild plants gathered from the hillsides around the cave, then likely roasted or ground down, releasing exactly the kind of starch that bacteria love. These hunter-gatherers had, by accident, stumbled onto a diet just concentrated enough in carbohydrate to rot their teeth thousands of years before anyone planted a crop. Here is the twist inside the twist. It was never really about farming. Farming was simply the moment humanity industrialized a habit that had already existed in pockets, wherever a starchy wild food happened to be abundant enough to lean on. Concentrated carbohydrate rots teeth, whether it comes from a cultivated field or a basket of gathered acorns. Agriculture did not invent the problem. It made the problem universal, permanent, and impossible to escape, because for the first time, an entire population ate the same starchy staple every day for their entire lives. Remember that the next time someone insists a single ancient diet holds the secret to perfect health, there was no one ancient diet. There were thousands of them, shaped by whatever coastline, forest, or hillside. A group of people happened to call home, and each one left its own distinct signature on the teeth left behind. So decay was not some myth invented by modern dentistry to sell you toothpaste. It is real, it is ancient in places, and it is deeply tied to what specifically ends up on your plate. Ancient people were not passive about that pain. In 2012, a research team led by archaeologist Federico Bernardini examined a Neolithic jawbone unearthed near Trieste, in what is now Slovenia. Inside a cracked canine, dated to roughly 6,500 years old, they found traces of beeswax packed directly into the crack. It looked, unmistakably, like a filling. Someone, thousands of years before the first dental drill, had noticed a broken, painful tooth and tried to seal it shut with the stickiest, most workable material within reach. That single tooth may be the oldest known evidence of one human being practicing dentistry on another. It tells you that toothache is not a modern inconvenience. It is old enough that your ancestors were already inventing home remedies for it, long before anyone wrote the word cavity down. But cavities are only half of what your mouth is quietly telling you. There is a second mystery hiding in the ancient skull, and it has nothing to do with bacteria at all. It has to do with space. Walk through a museum collection of ancient human skulls, and you will notice something almost unsettling. The jaws are wide. The teeth sit in neat, unbroken rows. There is room, real physical room, for every single tooth, including the back molars your own dentist may have already told you to remove. Daniel Lieberman, an evolutionary biologist at Harvard who has spent years studying skeletal collections, has pointed to this pattern again and again. Ancient hunter-gatherer skulls tend to show close to perfect dental alignment. Skulls from more recent centuries show the opposite. Crowding, impacted molars, teeth twisted sideways in a jaw simply too small to hold them. Why would a jaw shrink over just a few thousand years? Genes do not move that fast. The answer turns out to be mechanical, not genetic. Your jawbone is living tissue, and like any living tissue, it responds to the forces placed on it while you grow. A child who spends years chewing tough, fibrous, resistant food is, without knowing it, exercising the jaw the same way a workout exercises a muscle. That repeated strain signals the bone to grow wider, stronger, longer. Julie Lawrence, a biological anthropologist at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, describes the way teeth emerge almost like a zipper closing along the jaw. The jaw has to grow forward, opening space, before each tooth can push through in its turn. Stall that growth and the zipper jams. A tooth is left stuck below the gum line, or shoved sideways into whatever gap it can find. That single image explains nearly every impacted wisdom tooth ever pulled. A child raised on soft, cooked, processed food never receives that signal. The jaw grows to a smaller final size, and the 28 to 32 teeth that are supposed to fit inside it are left to compete for space that simply is not there. Crowding is not a defect written into your DNA. It is closer to an underused muscle, except the muscle happens to be your face. Scientists tested this directly, not just in humans, but in animals raised under controlled conditions. Populations of monkeys fed a naturally tough diet developed wider jaws with well-spaced teeth. Their relatives, given the exact same nutrients but in a soft, mushy form, developed narrower jaws, rotated premolars, and visibly crowded teeth. Same genes, same species. Different chewing demands, different faces. Now widen the lens across human history. A 2015 study examined nearly 300 skeletons spanning the Levant, Anatolia, and Europe, dating from around 28,000 years ago up to about 6,000 years ago. The pattern was consistent. Hunter-gatherer jaws, shaped by decades of tough chewing, were reliably larger and differently proportioned than the jaws of the farming populations that came after them. As diets softened, jaws quietly, gradually shrank. This is why your wisdom teeth may never find room to fully emerge. It is why so many people alive right now will eventually sit in an oral surgeon's chair to have 4 healthy teeth cut out, simply because there is no space left for them. Your ancestors were not straightening their teeth. They were simply chewing hard enough, often enough, for long enough, that their jaws grew into a shape with room to spare. None of this means the ancient mouth was some flawless ideal you should long for. It came with its own price, and that price shows up the moment you look past the front teeth and study the surface itself. Ancient teeth are often ground down almost flat, tooth enamel worn away in visible layers, sometimes exposing the softer dentin underneath, sometimes exposing the nerve. This is called attrition, and it is the natural result of a lifetime spent chewing gritty, fibrous, unprocessed food, often with tiny particles of stone or sand mixed in from grinding tools. Every bite was, in a small way, sandpaper against enamel. By their 30s and 40s, many ancient adults had teeth worn down to nubs. Exposed nerves meant chronic pain with no anesthetic, no root canal, no relief beyond time and endurance. Teeth were also used as tools, gripping hides, softening fiber, holding objects steady while both hands worked. Every one of those uses added more wear to a surface that would never be replaced. Some of that wear came from the food itself, not just the chewing. Wild grains and roots were often ground between 2 stones before eating, and that process left behind fine grit, invisible flecks of stone dust mixed directly into the meal. Chew that grit every day for 40 years, and it works exactly like sandpaper, slowly filing down enamel with every single bite. Add smoke-cured meat, tough sinew, and unrefined fiber to that same mouth, and you get teeth that worked harder than yours ever will, and paid for it in exposed dentin, cracked cusp, and molars ground down almost to the gum line by middle age. There is one more quiet advantage hiding underneath all of this, and it has nothing to do with diet at all. Most people in the deep past simply did not live long enough for slow-growing dental problems to catch up with them. A mouth with fewer decades of exposure to any harmful bacteria is, almost by definition, going to look healthier at the moment of death than a mouth that has had 80 years to accumulate damage. Some of what looks like ancient dental superiority is really just ancient shortened lifespan, and that is a much harder truth to put on a highlight reel. So which is it? Were ancient humans blessed with better teeth, or did they simply trade one set of problems for another? The honest answer is both, and the honesty is the point. Their teeth were straighter, because their jaws had done the hard mechanical work of growing wide enough to hold every tooth. Their teeth were, in many populations, less prone to bacterial decay, because their food rarely delivered concentrated carbohydrate straight into the mouths of cavity-causing bacteria. But their teeth were also ground down early, exposed to raw pain with no modern relief, and never given the decades of extra life that would test true long-term durability. Even tooth loss connects the two timelines in an odd way. An ancient elder who lived past 50 often lost teeth to wear so severe that it exposed the root beneath to infection. A modern elder who lives past 50 often loses teeth to decades of sugar-fed bacteria eating away at the gum line instead. Different mechanisms, different diets, centuries apart. The same ending arriving from two entirely different directions. Now, bring it back to you, standing at that bathroom mirror. Every soft, cooked, processed meal you have ever eaten shaped the width of your jaw before you were old enough to choose your own food. Every sip of sugary coffee, every soda, every dessert fed a colony of bacteria that has been quietly reshaping the surface of your teeth since childhood. None of this happened because your biology failed you. It happened because your environment shifted dramatically, in a few thousand years, while your body was still built for a world that no longer exists. Your dentist is not fighting some flaw baked into human nature. Your dentist is managing the fallout of a mismatch between a mouth built for tough roots and wild greens and a life built around bread, sugar, and food so soft it barely requires a bite. Consider how much of your daily food would be unrecognizable to a hunter-gatherer's jaw. Bread that dissolves before you finish chewing it. Pasta boiled soft enough to swallow in a few bites. A single sugary drink carrying more concentrated sweetness than your ancestors might have tasted across an entire season. None of it asks your jaw to work. None of it asks your teeth to do the job they evolved to do. Your body adapted to a world where every meal was a small negotiation with something raw and resistant. And you now live inside a world where that negotiation has been engineered away, one soft bite at a time. This is part of why braces have become so ordinary that an orthodontist's waiting room barely raises an eyebrow anymore. Teenager after teenager walks around with a mouth full of metal, quietly correcting a problem that a childhood of tougher, more fibrous food might have prevented in the first place. Researchers studying jaw development have even linked this shrinking jaw to how children breathe at night. A child who breathes through the mouth instead of the nose, hour after hour, year after year, can end up with a narrower palate and even less room for teeth, compounding a problem that soft food had already started. And of coursingly www. This is also not only an adult story. Global health researchers estimate that more than half of the world's schoolchildren carry untreated decay in their baby teeth alone. A 5-year-old growing up in a farming village 10,000 years ago faced almost none of that risk. A 5-year-old today, anywhere a sugary drink is sold on a shelf, faces it constantly. Scientists have a name for this kind of problem. They call it an evolutionary mismatch, a gap between the body you inherited and the environment you actually live inside. Your teeth may be one of the clearest examples anywhere in the human body. The hardware has barely changed in tens of thousands of years. The diet running through that hardware every single day has changed almost completely, and your jaw is still, quietly, trying to catch up. Somewhere in your jaw right now, there may be a wisdom tooth waiting for room your ancestors would have had without trying. Somewhere on your enamel, there may be bacteria feeding on the last thing you ate for lunch. And somewhere in the deep, uncounted past, another human being ran their tongue across their own teeth. Smooth, straight, and, on more days than you might expect, quietly rotting from the inside, one bite of something sweet at a time. The next piece of tough bread you actually chew instead of swallow half whole, or the next apple you bite into instead of slicing first, asks something of your jaw that almost nothing else in your day ever does. It is a small, strange way of speaking to an ancestor you will never meet, in the one language your body has never forgotten. Tonight, when you stand at that mirror and check your smile, you will not just be looking at your own reflection. You will be looking at the last chapter of a story that started long before toothbrushes, long before dentists, long before anyone ever worried about a perfect smile at all.